I moved into a new apartment about 6 months ago, and I was next to this lady and her 3 young children. She befriended me, and I thought she was nice enough. We'd have a few drinks together like once a week, then I'd go home. We got along pretty well, and one night she asked me to watch her kids for a little bit and she'd pay me. She said an hour. She turned up 4 hours later, pissed drunk, and didn't pay me. I figured I'd let it slide. I had her kids in bed, so I just left. She continually kept dropping her kids off on me and always came home annihilated. I got really sick of it and started not answering my door. A couple weeks later, she was having a party in the fucking hallway. I had came back from class, she saw me and invited me over for a couple drinks. I figured I may as well. After a couple hours, she started snorting pills, just pounding back more shots, while holding her infant. Everyone was passed out by this point or gone. She projectile vomited in the floor and almost dropped her baby and then passed out. Me or her kids couldn't wake her, so I fixed them something to eat, put them in bed, and went home. Several times over the following weeks this would happen, and then she started leaving her children alone. Mind you, they were 8, 5, and 3 months old. They would come knock on my door because they were hungry or scared. I'd always feed them and let them sit in my living room. After a couple times of this happening, I got completely fed up. I had CPS on dial. I gave her 15 minutes to come home. She showed up and took her kids home. While I was at school one evening, my roommate texted me to inform me that she had busted in our apartment while she thought no one was there. Well, he was. He made her leave. And what do you know? $100 went missing from my house a few days before that. I guarantee it was her. A pair of my heels and a bunch of change was gone too. That night when I came home, knock on the door. This time she had left her kids alone for hours on end. We were done with this shit. My roommate called CPS and the police. The police showed up instantly and were furious. She had left her children alone. They had tried to cook and there was broken glass all in the floor. The baby's diaper was on her so long it was stuck to her, and there was evidence that she would beat them. I told the police all that I'd seen over the past few months. They took our statements and waited for her to come home. She showed up miraculously after they got a hold of her baby daddy. Out the window, I saw her and she started getting violent with the police. They slammed her on the car and arrested her. One of the police came back upstairs and informed me that she stated that I was supposed to be watching her kids. She wanted me to lie for her. I said absolutely not. Turns out she was drunk on arrival and had previous child neglect charges and a theft charge. She's been in jail since December. Her children are with their grandparents and very well taken care of. Sorry for the wall of text. This bitch was a nightmare. I'm glad to be rid of her. You don't know a neighbor from hell until you've lived next to 2 different residents who were into dogfighting. The house next to ours was always pretty suspicious because literally no one could move in there without something bad happening. When I was about 10, the house caught on fire, and I was told it was because the teenage boys who lived there were burning pennies or something. After that, the house was purchased by a few men and 1 woman. I was maybe 12 when all this happened. I walk out to my backyard one day and there's about 6 little pit bull puppies trotting around the yard with their mother hanging out somewhere in the distance. Occasionally, the smallest one would come over to stare at me a bit, and he'd run after me if I ran back and forth along the fence. Months went by, police increased on our street, and the puppies gradually disappeared, all except the little one. We never saw or heard what was going on, but there were a lot of dog cages in the owners' cars. One day I actually saw one of the men training the last dog, as in deliberately irritating him, shoving him, hitting him with things to make him bite. And whenever that dog was left outside on his own, he'd come to the fence snarling and barking at anyone who came close. Almost got my mom one day when she was trimming our bushes back. Our 2 yards are separated by a single steel fence, and towards the back the fence sags dangerously inward towards our side. The dog would have made it into our yard had Mom not used the pepper spray. And then one day they were just gone. The neighbors, the cars, the cages. The puppy I'd watched grow from a sweet, pudgy-faced baby into a vicious, angry, poorly socialized fighting dog. To this day, I still find this to be one of the most depressing things I've ever experienced growing up. My neighbor is very weird. He never waves and has a permanent sneer on his face. When we moved in, we were warned he's a registered sex offender and to call the cops if we see him with kids. One day, he calls up out of the blue. I've never spoken to him before, but he proceeds to launch into his explanation of the sex offender record. Basically, he claims that he hurt some kid in a locker room while they both happened to be naked. He says it was plain old vanilla assault where both parties happened to be nude. Then he hung up. That's not the weird part, it's just to give you an idea of what he's like. One day he starts building a sign in front of his house. Not like a little poster. It's professionally printed on metal and mounted on 2 huge posts set with concrete. The sign is a picture of a puppy and a long rambling story about how he let his puppy play in the street, and it got hit by a car 10 years ago. But it's written in a way where he seems to accuse the neighborhood of murdering his dog. Next to this sign, covering his entire fence, is an enormous banner reading, "We miss you." I don't know who "we" is. He lives alone. And an even larger picture of the puppy, which isn't necessary because directly in front of the banner, sitting on a folding card table, is the actual puppy. He had it stuffed and set it out on display and left it there for days and hid behind the fence waiting for someone to mess with it, but nobody did. The puppy and the banner disappeared, but the metal sign was permanent. It stayed up for years until a bad storm ripped it down. I always wondered what he does with the dog. Does it stay in a closet or does he keep it out in his house? I got my answer. I have a friend who does construction, and one day he was hired by weirdo neighbor to build a shed. Without my even asking, he tells me the guy keeps a stuffed dog in the living room like a piece of furniture and that he talks to it. My last neighbor basically stalked me for over a year. Dude moved into the house next door with his elderly parents, and right off the bat shit went wrong. The first night he moved in, it's the middle of the night, like 1 a.m., and someone starts knocking on my door. Not strong knocks like it's an emergency, but these light taps. I, of course, did not fucking open the door. The next morning at around 10, there are more knocks, same light taps, and this time I do answer it, and it's my new neighbor. He introduces himself, and I ask him if he was knocking the night before, and he admits it. I politely ask him to not come to my house so late again, and he agrees. Cue the next year of my life. The dude continues to show up randomly in my yard. Pretty much every single time I went outside, this dude would leave his house and come over to mine. It was like he would wait on his porch, watching my house, just to see when I'd leave it. I'd go out to check the mail and he'd come over. I'd go out getting ready to go somewhere and he'd come over. I'd go out and would be working in my garden. Happened to look up, and he's standing there. Sometimes he just walked over, stood in the middle of the road and stared at my house or me, not saying a word. Most of the time, he just hung around silently and made the barest attempts at conversation, mostly asking if I had a boyfriend. I lied and said I did, making me incredibly uncomfortable. I told him multiple times to basically leave me alone, starting by being polite and eventually just telling him to fuck off outright. He'd act like he listened and understood, but he kept doing the same shit. It got to the point where I didn't even want to leave my house or answer my door. He still kept knocking occasionally, and it sounds utterly stupid, but even inside my house, I'd sometimes just get this feeling that someone was standing around just outside, even though I had no knowledge whether that was true or not. Then he started showing up at other places I was at. It's a small town, so I thought at first, okay, maybe it's a coincidence, you're being paranoid, but it became very clear soon enough that the guy was following me. I'd be at the grocery store and he'd come around the corner. I'd be at the gas station and very soon he'd pull up next to me, not even getting gas, but just parking there and watching me while I filled my car. It happened too many times, and his behavior was too odd for it to just be happenstance. Throughout all of this happening, I was telling people about it. I told our mutual landlord the first time this dude knocked on my door in the middle of the night that I liked my privacy and didn't like that kind of crap. I told him again after the guy kept showing up in my yard. My landlord basically promised to talk to the dude and tell him to leave me alone after that. Then after I complained to my landlord that the dude was stalking me outside of the neighborhood too, he told me that he'd talk to the neighbor again and that if anything else happened, then he'd kick the guy out. I also have a close friend whose husband is a cop and talked with him about everything, and he basically told me there wasn't shit that could be done unless the guy outright threatened me or otherwise damaged my house property. He told me the best thing to do would be to move out or to keep talking to the landlord and hope that he'd kick the dude out. As it turns out, the landlord eventually did kick the guy out, but not for anything that he was doing to me. Dude apparently couldn't pay his bills and was several months behind in rent. The whole family got ousted. They left. And according to my landlord, they apparently totally destroyed the house in the time they were living there. Holes in the walls, the floors, literally hundreds of empty liquor bottles in the basement, needles on the ground in the yard, burnt foil all over the place. They also left their pet dog behind when they moved out, locked in the house and half-starved, and would probably be dead had the landlord not found him. Landlord ended up taking him to court over damages and unpaid rent, and I have no idea where they moved, but I haven't seen the guy since. I now have a new neighbor who I barely ever see, and wouldn't know I had if I didn't see his car come in and out, or occasionally see his dog hanging out on his porch, and I can't tell you how much I prefer it that way. I lived next to 3 bro-type mid-20s guys who clearly all just found each other on Craigslist for a year a while back. Row homes, so we shared a wall. I'm just gonna give them all names: Brad, Dave, and Sherman. Here are some highlights. Brad's girlfriend knocking on our door at 3 a.m. to have a fight with him and then barging into our house and falling asleep on our couch. Then he showed up, and they had their fight in our living room. Then she left, then he left, and came back 5 minutes later with a bottle of whiskey and drank it, by himself, while he sat on our stoop in his tank top, basketball shorts, long socks, and sandals. Around 9 in the morning, I heard her waking him up by screaming his name at the top of her lungs about 5 times. He passed out on the stoop. Sherman and Dave showing up to a party at our house, uninvited, with a case of beer that turned out to be empty. They bragged about it to our other female roommate, who kicked them out. All 3 of them standing outside of our houses whenever we had a party, trying to get girls to come to their party instead. Brad crashing his dad's car into Sherman's car, which in turn crashed into our other neighbor's car. Everyone was in their car when this happened. First thing out of Brad's mouth, "Sorry dude, I was itching my balls." They all laughed it off, except for our other neighbor who called the cops. Brad getting a DUI for crashing his dad's car into Sherman's car, which in turn crashed into our other neighbor's car and dropping several N-bombs during his arrest. Brad defending his use of nigger because his black friends said it around him to the female, black, arresting officer. All 3 of them getting arrested for peeing off of their roof into their own backyard, midday, shit-faced, on Easter. They narrowly escaped being charged with exposing themselves to minors since they were in plain view of our neighbor's family gathering. Brad moved out after that, and the last time we saw him, he had one of those comfy toilet seats around his neck while carrying a box of his belongings, which were a lamp, a framed picture of himself graduating from high school, some socks, a weight, and a bottle of Head and Shoulders. Sherman making us cookies because they had a party and threw all of their trash into our backyard all night long because they ran out of trash bags. Dave sobbing in his room all night long. Dave getting banned from the local bar because he was on some unknown substance and repeatedly passed out in progressively stranger places and positions. Dave getting rebanned from the local bar when he had attempted to use a menu to obscure his face while having Sherman order. Dave sitting on our stoop drinking moonshine literally all morning, while holding some sort of legal textbook, and telling every passing woman that he was studying for his LSATs. False. Dave also tried this on my roommate's girlfriend and her mom, and when they just walked past him leaving us momentarily together on the stoop before I closed the door, said, "Dude, can you believe chicks are falling for this?" Dave and Sherman arguing about whether or not Dave shit himself. Dave falling off our roof and landing in our very large overgrown rosebush. Sherman getting into a trash fight verbal argument with an old Chinese woman who had beaten him to a bookcase someone else on our street threw away. Sherman losing that fight. The 2 weeks in which Dave had a girlfriend and was clearly lying about his job having a job. He would actually leave his house with her every morning in a shirt and tie, sweaty as fuck, drive her to work and come home. Then leave again and come back with her. He would also make a big show of being a sober, healthy individual who, sometimes drank but never really got drunk and didn't really like how it felt. He usually gave you this speech while swigging from a gallon bottle of water and sweating profusely. The time Dave crashed his car in an empty parking lot while he was blackout drunk, after running 3 consecutive red lights and evading arrest somehow, and then just went home, prompting the police to show up and straight up arrest him at 3 a.m. It was during this interaction that someone let it slip that this is like his umpteenth drinking-related arrest, and his girlfriend stopped yelling at the cops and started yelling at him while he just kept shouting some shit about it just being mouthwash and for the cops to just get her home safe. I'll sort it all out, baby, I promise. Baby, why are you crying? Aw, babe. The second time Dave fell off of our roof, but this time he missed the bush and landed on the concrete and spent the next hour and a half crying like a baby for someone to come help him. Then he yelled at us for not getting there quicker. This was the day we realized we were on a first-name basis with several police officers. Sherman has his computer seized by the police. Sherman is arrested for corporate espionage, which, obviously. Anyway, with Sherman moving on to better things, we now enter the Just Dave era. Some highlights. Dave forgetting which door was his about twice a week. Dave locking himself out almost every day somehow. Dave cutting his belly open, climbing into our alley because he locked himself out and covering both of our backyards in blood. Dave getting banned for the third time from the local bar for trying to sneak in one of the many rotating underage good time party bros or drug dealers, and then popping his stitches and bleeding everywhere, while wearing a cowboy hat and fake facial hair. I don't know if that was part of his plan or just some other adventure. This is also when we started actively fucking with him because we knew he was moving out and that his landlord had sold the house to some young gentrifier. He was allowed to see out his lease as long as there was no more damage. The place was a disaster at this point and no more major incidents of any kind. We put every speaker in our house up against our shared wall and played recordings of giant turtles mating and responded to his texts with, "Nah man, no one's home, not us," until he finally flipped out and called the cops. But we heard him doing it during a gap in the sounds, and so we called the cops and said the noise was coming from his place, hid the speakers, and left. He got a citation. And so somewhere in writing he's been charged with playing animal mating sounds at a volume exceeding acceptable levels. I would pick up rocks from the construction site across the street and place them on his side of the stoop right in front of his door. Each night I grabbed a bigger rock, until one day there was essentially a piece of debris the size of a basketball just sitting in front of his door. My room is above the stoop, and every morning I'd been watching him move the rocks and becoming more and more frustrated. I did this for at least 2 weeks. In the morning when he saw the giant rock, he finally lost it. Flipped out, screaming, pacing angrily, whole nine. The invisible conspiracy I can't believe none of you sheeple see kind of flip out. But then something truly amazing happened. He grabbed the giant rock and threw it directly at the facade of his house, which broke an enormous piece of some part of the building, not an architect, off. These are really old houses. This was definitely not a cheap or easy thing to fix. He just stood there staring at what he'd done, and then just started slamming the rock into the steps, screaming "fuck," until he sort of fell across the sidewalk backwards and smacked his head into a parked car. The alarm went off and he went inside. About 20 minutes later, the cops showed up. 2 days later, he was gone.